I would encourage the chairman to demand that we have any and all, but in particular Mr. Grush, talk to us in a skiff. And if that access is denied, I will personally volunteer to initiate the Holman Rule against any personnel or any program or any agency that denies access to Congress.
Nell'episodio 19 abbiamo sentito una disclosure alternativa, quella di Steven Greer. Le testimonianze portate da lui sono attendibili? Non possiamo saperlo. Ma perché inventarsi tutta questa pantomima, coinvolgendo decine di testimoni? È rilevante però che lui sia al terzo tentativo in 22 anni e che al secondo ci fosse lo stesso avvocato dei whistleblower di oggi, Daniel Sheehan, che tra l'altro è l'avvocato di Lou Elizondo. Luglio e agosto sono stati 2 mesi forieri di news molto rilevanti in ambito UFO e intelligenze non umane, o NHI, Non Human Intelligence, come le chiamano gli americani. Infatti abbiamo pubblicato interessanti interviste e news sul canale e lo abbiamo anche rinominato da Intermundia UFO a Intermundia NHI, il termine che per primo aveva utilizzato John Ramirez un anno fa circa nell'episodio numero 12. Finalmente sembra che la disclosure stia accelerando. Alla luce dell'udienza sotto giuramento del 26 luglio, che trovate integralmente sottotitolata in italiano sul nostro canale, in 4 video, è ormai necessario fare un po' di ordine provando ad analizzarla. Se siete arrivati qua sul canale per la prima volta, vi consigliamo di partire dall'inizio e guardare almeno gli episodi settimanali e le news su David Grush. Oggi infatti daremo per scontato delle informazioni che abbiamo acquisito già mesi fa. Se siete degli scettici professionisti, purtroppo non possiamo far nulla per voi. La disclosure sembra essere un'operazione di informazione al pubblico, realizzata in vari step a partire dal 2017 con la fuga di notizie ordite da Christopher Mellon, il sottosegretario della difesa, dando al New York Times in un parcheggio del Pentagono i famosi video delle telecamere FLIR, come leggiamo da questo articolo. La disclosure è stata poi sviluppata da alcune parti del governo americano e dalla TV Stars. Lo abbiamo visto nei primi 2 episodi. I governi fanno spesso operazioni di informazione. In Europa, ad esempio, è successo con l'euro. Per almeno un anno TV e giornali ci hanno spiegato come, quando e perché sarebbe entrato in circolazione l'euro. Ma a volte fanno anche campagne di disinformazione. Solitamente le vediamo in tempo di guerra. Ma perché è stato necessario mantenere il segreto e solo adesso ci confermano l'esistenza delle intelligenze non umane? Ce lo spiegano Jonathan Gray, un funzionario dell'intelligence statunitense in forza al NASIC, il National Aerospace Intelligence Center, e David Grush, nell'articolo che ha portato prima alla sua intervista su News Nation e poi all'udienza a porte aperte al Congresso. Jonathan Gray sostiene che i segreti sono necessari. I potenziali progressi tecnologici che si possono ottenere dai recuperi degli UAP, dalle intelligenze non umane, da parte di qualsiasi nazione sufficientemente avanzata, possono essere utilizzati per condurre una guerra asimmetrica, per cui è necessario mantenere una certa segretezza. Tuttavia non è più necessario continuare a negare l'esistenza di queste tecnologie avanzate derivate dall'intelligenza non umana o negare che queste tecnologie siano atterrate, precipitate o cadute nelle mani degli esseri umani. Gray ha osservato che l'ipotesi che gli Stati Uniti da soli abbiano costretto le altre nazioni a mantenere questa segretezza per quasi un secolo continua a prevalere come consenso primario tra il grande pubblico. La mia speranza è di dissuadere la popolazione mondiale da questa nozione arcaica e assurda e di aprire potenzialmente la strada ad una discussione molto più ampia, ha detto. Grush ha detto che è pericoloso che questa corsa agli armamenti, che dura da 80 anni, continui nella segretezza, perché inibisce ulteriormente la popolazione mondiale ad essere preparata ad uno scenario inaspettato di contatto con un'intelligenza non umana. Spero che questa rivelazione serva da shock ontologico e sociologico e fornisca una questione di unione generale alle nazioni del mondo per rivalutare le loro priorità, ha detto Grush. Negli episodi numero 16 e 19 abbiamo anche visto che la disclosure sembra sia stata tentata altre 3 volte, una volta a metà degli anni 90, una nel 2001 e un'altra nel 2013. Tutte dicevano più o meno le stesse cose, ma mai nulla è proseguito in qualcosa di ufficiale, né tantomeno è arrivato in Italia, tranne in questa ultima disclosure, in cui abbiamo già inteso come l'Italia sia profondamente coinvolta. Lo abbiamo capito nell'episodio numero 6. La fase americana di questa ultima disclosure, quest'estate, ha visto la dichiarazione giurate di 3 testimoni davanti al Congresso americano. In questo episodio, dove analizziamo le dichiarazioni dell'udienza del 26 luglio, il format è un po' diverso. Infatti oggi commentiamo i contenuti dopo la visione e non prima.
Also, I know I saw it in the crowd there, George Knapp, my buddy Jeremy Corbell. They're not witnesses, but they've provided some statements on this subject, and I seek unanimous consent to enter those statements into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Also, would like to enter in, I understand now that this is unclassified and it's public record, but as we all know, that's sometimes difficult for the public to get a hold of. A report, Defense Intelligence Reference Documents, Advanced Space Propulsion Based on Vacuum, Space-Time Metric Engineering, some light reading for some of our members.
Without objection.
Thank you. You know, Mr. Knapp wrote, since 1969, the position of our military has been that UFOs pose no threat to national security and are not worthy of further study. I'd say that's the biggest understatement of the decade. Mr. Cabral says, as he writes these words, the UFO is emerging as a major topic of global importance. I can state that as a fact.
Tim Burchett, il nostro eroe, ha chiesto di mettere a verbale 2 contenuti, le dichiarazioni di Corbell e del giornalista Knapp. È un documento dell'Intelligenze della Difesa che tratta di propulsione spaziale basata sull'energia del vuoto e l'ingegnerizzazione dello spazio-tempo. E, se vi ricordate, ce ne aveva parlato Harold Puthoff. Speriamo di tornarci presto con un episodio ad hoc. Aver messo a verbale le dichiarazioni e il documento sulla propulsione ovviamente dà credito sia ai giornalisti che a Hal Puthoff. Ricordatevi che stiamo parlando di un'udienza parlamentare. In America c'è il carcere fino a 14 anni per falsa testimonianza, da 2 a 6 in Italia. Interessante che abbia confermato come l'argomento UFO sia di importanza globale.
We've run into roadblocks from members from the intelligence community, the Pentagon. I proposed legislation to go in the FAA reauthorization that just said if an airline pilot has a sighting, that when he makes that report to the FAA, that it would come to Congress. But I was told that the intelligence community did not like that, and the amendment was not even heard in committee. I think it's time for this country to take back our country. We need to tell the folks at the Pentagon they work for us. Dadgummit, we don't work for them.
Qui invece ci sta dicendo che il Pentagono, che non ammette ancora nulla, però non ha gradito che i parlamentari potessero ricevere, a norma di legge, direttamente i report dei piloti dell'aviazione civile, che non dovrebbero essere coperti da segreto, perché non utilizzano tecnologie militari, ma comunque non hanno accettato che l'emendamento legislativo venisse proposto. La questione è, ma se gli UFO non esistono, perché ci vitate di ricevere i rapporti dall'aviazione civile? Perché una grande parte del Pentagono non vuole rivelare la presenza degli alieni?
Why is it like they don't want what is it they don't want the public to know?
That's a good question. I've got a theory about that. I think it's about control. They think once that they lose control of the issue that, could you imagine if this world was focused on one issue, looking at something like that, we could all come together on something? I think that would just disrupt the whole military-industrial complex, the religious-industrial complex, on down the line. It would just disrupt that whole chain. And they don't want it. They don't want it. They want control. They want secrets. They want it compartmentalized. They don't trust us. It's all about power and control. And right now they've got it. And Congress, frankly, is gutless. This is ridiculous. This is the arrogance of power, and it needs to end today. This is a cover-up. It needs to come to an end, and the arrogance needs to stop.
Today is the first hearing of its kind where we will attempt to get down to the bottom of what is actually happening with UAPs. But we will hear from people who have had personal sightings rather than Pentagon bureaucrats who have always been sent to stonewall our investigations. Just so that the press knows and the people know, We were even denied access to a classified briefing in a skiff prior to this hearing due to the amount of hoops that we had to jump through to grant temporary clearance to witness Grush, who has knowledge of classified information. It is time to have an open-minded discussion on this topic, to hear the evidence and understand the magnitude of what this means not just for our nation, but for humanity.
L'onorevole Luna, che peraltro in gioventù era un militare della US Air Force, con mansioni nella logistica, ci sta dicendo che il Pentagono ha negato a lei e a Tim Burchett la possibilità di partecipare a un briefing segreto con David Grush, a causa di una burocrazia interna, il famoso Deep State americano, come ci spiega sempre Dario Fabbri.
This hearing will also not be the end of this discussion, but a new chapter and start to years and years of work that many folks, both in the public and within government, have been working on. We should encourage more reporting, not less, on UAPs. The more we understand, the safer we will be. We will hear testimony from witnesses today with a long record of service to the American people and with subject matter expertise. Our witnesses have a unique opportunity to share their perspective, insights, and their experiences with the American people. And I encourage all of my colleagues to engage with these difficult questions with an open mind and to follow the facts on behalf of our country.
Questa udienza non è la fine della discussione sugli UFO, ma un nuovo inizio. Quindi ci dobbiamo aspettare più udienze, più materiale, speriamo più esplicito, chiaro e ufficiale.
I was contacted by Mr. Elizondo, and we talked for a short period of time, and he said we'd be in contact. A few weeks after that, I was made aware that Lou had left the Pentagon in protest and joined forces with Tom DeLonge, Chris Mellon, Steve Justice, and others to form Two Stars Academy, an organization that pressed the issue with leading industry experts and U.S. government officials. They worked with Leslie Kean, who is present today, Ralph Blumenthal, and Helene Cooper to publish the articles in the New York Times 2017 New York Times. And it removed the stigma on the topic of UFOs, which is why we're here today. Those articles open the door for the government and public that cannot be closed. It has led to an interest from our elected officials who are not focused on little green men, but figuring out where these craft are, where they're from, the technology they possess, how do they operate. It also led to the Whistleblower Protection Act and the NDAA. There are multiple witnesses coming forward to say that have firsthand knowledge, and Mr. Grush just covered that. What concerns me is that there's no oversight from our elected officials on anything associated with our government processing or working on craft. Believe it not from this world. This issue is not a full public disclosure that could undermine national security, but it is about ensuring that our system of checks and balances works across all work done in the government using taxpayer funds. Relative to government programs, even unacknowledged wave programs have some level of oversight by the appropriate committee members in the House and Senate, and this work that is said to be occurring from whistleblower testimonies should not be exempt. In closing, I would like to say that the Tic Tac object we engaged in 2004 was far superior to anything that we had on time, have today, or are looking to develop in the next 10 years.
Elizondo è parte integrante della To The Stars, un'organizzazione che fa pressioni tramite leader esperti del settore e funzionari del governo e lavorano con Leslie Kean, la giornalista che ha pubblicato il famoso articolo nel 2017 nel New York Times, e lavorano per rimuovere lo stigma. In pratica ha confermato che la To The Stars è un tassello importante della disclosure, come abbiamo visto nei primi 6 episodi. Ha insistito anche sul fatto che i leader eletti non hanno la supervisione di alcuni programmi, il che è ovviamente fondamentale, alla luce ad esempio delle dichiarazioni di Michael Herrera dell'episodio 18 riguardo al traffico di esseri umani e sul fatto che sembra che qualche milizia americana abbia a disposizione della tecnologia di derivazione aliena, il tutto senza rispettare la catena di comando e controllo.
We would see these objects being at 0.0 Mach, that's zero airspeed, over certain pieces of the ground. So what that means, just like a river, if you throw a bobber in, it's going to float downstream. These objects were staying completely stationary in Category 4 hurricane winds.
Dark gray or black cubes?
Yes, inside of a clear sphere, where the apex or tips of the cube were touching the inside of that sphere. And that was primarily what was being reported when we were able to gain a visual tally of these objects. And that occurred over almost 8 years. And as far as I know, it's still occurring.
Questi oggetti erano stazionari in aria durante un uragano di categoria 4, cioè con venti a 240 km all'ora. Agli scettici, per cortesia, scrivete nei commenti quale oggetto costruito dall'uomo può rimanere fermo in aria con il vento a 240 km all'ora. E tra l'altro questi oggetti sono in cielo almeno dal 2014 e sono presenti ancora oggi. Quindi se prendete un aereo e andate in zona potete vederli.
You received prior approval from the Defense Department to speak on certain issues, correct?
Correct, through DOPSR, DoD Pre-Publication and Security Review, and I just want to remind the public, they're just looking from a security perspective. These are my own personal views and opinions, not the department's.
Confermato anche che Grush ha un'approvazione preventiva dal Pentagono, quindi questo dà ulteriore credito alla questione della disclosure organizzata.
Can you please explain to me in detail the event that occurred at Vandenberg Air Force Base?
Certainly. In the 2003 timeframe, a large group of Boeing contractors were operating near one of the launch facilities at Vandenberg Air Force Base when they observed a very large 100-yard-sided red square approach the base from the ocean and hover at low altitude over one of the launch facilities. This object remained for about 45 seconds or so before darting off over the mountains. There was a similar event within 24 hours later in the evening. This was a morning event, I believe 8:45 in the morning. Later in the evening, post-sunset, there were reports of other sightings on base, including some aggressive behaviors. These objects were approaching some of the security guards at rapid speeds before darting off. And this is information that was received through one of the witnesses that have approached me at Americans for Safe Aerospace.
Was this documented in any official form, whether it was a police blotter?
Yes, they had official documentation and records from the event that the witness held over the years.
Qui abbiamo questo inedito racconto di un UFO cubico di 100 metri di lato, grande in pratica quanto un campo di calcio. È la prima volta che si parla in modo ufficiale di un avvistamento di un oggetto così grande. Rosso poi non si era mai sentito.
Do you have knowledge or do you have reason to believe that there are programs in the advanced tech space that are unsanctioned?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you say that they're above congressional oversight, what do you mean?
Complicated question. So there's, some, I would call it abuse here. So congressional oversight of conventional special access programs, so I'll use Title 10, so DOD as an example, right? So 10 U.S. Code Section 119 discusses congressional oversight of SAPs, discusses the DepSecDef's ability to waive congressional reporting. However, the Gang of Eight is at least supposed to be notified if a waived or waive-bigoted unacknowledged SAP is created, and that's public law.
Well, so that how does, I don't want to cut you off, but
Yeah.
how does a program like that get funded?
I will give you generalities. I can get very specific in a closed session, but misappropriation of funds and
Does that mean
self-fund.
that there is money in the budget that is said to go to a program, but it doesn't, and it goes to something else?
Yes, I have specific knowledge of that. Yep.
Do you think U.S. corporations are overcharging for certain tech they're selling to the U.S. government, and that additional money is going to programs?
Correct, through something called IRAD.
Di nuovo, programmi non autorizzati e al di sopra della supervisione del Congresso. Da nostre indagini, ma siamo sempre nel campo delle speculazioni, sembra che due siano le principali preoccupazioni del Congresso. Non la segretezza di per sé, ma una è il fatto che il Congresso non sia a conoscenza di come vengono utilizzati i velivoli alieni ritrovati, poiché tra l'altro sembrano essere conservati presso strutture private, e quindi di nuovo che non venga rispettata la catena di comando e di controllo. Ad esempio, a sentire i testimoni di Steven Greer, gli Stati Uniti hanno veramente creato e utilizzano velivoli che viaggiano quasi alla velocità della luce e si possono anche occultare. L'altra vera preoccupazione è che le aziende private della difesa americana, che ricevono dal governo i velivoli che precipitano, ne diventano i proprietari de facto, effettuano il reverse engineering di tecnologia aliena e successivamente vendono le scoperte a caro prezzo al Pentagono. Quindi alla fine sembra che ci siano degli interessi economici privati e poteri forti che preoccupano l'amministrazione americana. Oltre al fatto che questo espone l'amministrazione americana a varie cause da parte delle aziende che non hanno ricevuto i velivoli e che quindi non saranno mai concorrenziali come quelle che invece hanno il materiale alieno.
Let's talk about satellite imagery. We have satellites all over the place, some that we're aware of and many that we're not aware of, right? We're taking pictures of everything at every point and second. Mr. Grush, are you aware, do you have direct knowledge, or have you talked to people with direct knowledge that there are satellite imagery of these events?
That was one of my primary tasks at NGA, since we process, exploit, and disseminate that kind of information. I've seen multiple cases, some of which, to my understanding, and of course I left NGA in April, so that's my information cutoff date. But I personally reviewed both what we call overhead collection and from other strategic and tactical platforms that I could not even explain prosaically. And I have a degree in physics, by the way, as well. And I am aware that you guys have not seen these reports, unfortunately. And I don't know why.
Do you have direct knowledge, or you've spoken to people with direct knowledge that this imagery applies to crash sites, crash imagery?
I can't discuss that in an open session.
Bello sto riso di Grush quando dice che non può rispondere se hanno o meno immagini satellitari dei siti dove sono precipitati gli UFO. Ovviamente sappiamo la risposta. Chissà se hanno anche le foto del volo MH370 della Malaysia Airlines.
Mr. Graves, can you discuss the importance of seeking scientists to sit on your advisory board?
Absolutely. I think ultimately this is going to be a scientific problem. And not only that, it's also an engineering problem. I've been working with the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics to help them stand up a UAP integration committee to help integrate their engineering prowess into this problem. And so, yes, very much, I think this is an engineering and scientific problem as much as a national security problem.
And how might Congress help to facilitate partnerships between the scientific community and the UAP focus groups within government?
Well, I think one of the things they can do is to have these types of hearings to communicate to the public that this is a topic of interest. I think that there is a pseudo-market, if you will, of interested capabilities and talent that want to approach this topic, and we're seeing that start to grow now. So I think continued conversation, reduction of stigma is going to allow that to flourish and allow answers to help generate themselves.
100%. Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you for your work. I think it's important that we keep our top scientific minds focused on this issue and look for ways to increase collaboration. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Questa sembra essere un'altra questione strategica per gli americani, cioè il fatto di poter fare affidamento su scienziati che non siano militari. In pratica sembra che non ne abbiano abbastanza e per poter proseguire più velocemente con il reverse engineering abbiano bisogno di scienziati qualificati, cosa che non sembra essere un problema per paesi come la Cina che tipicamente hanno meno libertà e possono attingere a chiunque nel paese. Di conseguenza qualcuno ritiene che la questione potrebbe anche essere che la disclosure venga fatta adesso perché i cinesi sono molto più avanti nel reverse engineering. Naturalmente è impossibile da sapere per noi comuni mortali, ma di solito non c'è un solo perché. Sono sempre molteplici le ragioni. Quindi è probabile che ci sia un fondo di verità. Ma queste sono speculazioni.
Has there been an active U.S. government disinformation campaign to deny the existence of unidentified aerial phenomena? And if so, why?
I can't go beyond what I've already espoused publicly about that.
Okay, I've been told to ask you what that is and how to get it in the record.
What
have you stated publicly in your interviews for the congressional record?
If you reference my News Nation interview and I talk about a multi-decade, campaign to disenfranchise public interest, basically. Yeah.
Ulteriore conferma della campagna di disinformazione in atto da alcune decine di anni e hanno esplicitamente messo a verbale anche questa dichiarazione.
Has the U.S. government become aware of actual evidence of extraterrestrial, otherwise unexplained forms of intelligence? And if so, when do you think this first occurred?
I like to use the term non-human. I don't like to denote origin. Keeps the aperture open, both scientifically. Right. Certainly, like I've discussed publicly previously, 1930s.
Okay.
Scopriamo che insistono sul termine intelligenze non umane, o NHI, Non Human Intelligence, e non extraterrestri. Inoltre Grush conferma che sono a conoscenza degli UFO dagli anni 30, quindi quello di Mussolini.
Can you give me the names and titles of the people with direct first-hand knowledge and access to some of these crash retrieval programs, and maybe which facilities, military bases the recovered material would be in? And I know a lot of Congress talked about we're going to go to Area 51, and there's nothing there anymore anyway. It's just and we move like a glacier. As soon as we announce it, I'm sure the moving vans would pull up, but please.
I can't discuss that publicly, but I did provide that information both to the Intel committees and the Inspector General.
And we could get that in the skiff if we were allowed to get in a skiff with you. Would that be probably what you would think?
Sure, if you had the appropriate accesses, yeah.
What special access programs cover this information, and how is it possible that they have evaded oversight for so long?
I do know the names. Once again, I can't discuss that publicly and how they've evaded oversight. In a closed setting, I can tell you the specific tradecraft used.
All right. When do you think those programs began, and who authorized them?
I do know a lot of that information, but that's something I can't discuss publicly because of sensitivities.
Abbiamo sentito il termine SCIF. Cos'è uno SCIF? Sensitive Compartment Information Facility. È un luogo sicuro in cui è possibile visionare e discutere informazioni sensibili per evitare la sorveglianza o lo spionaggio dall'esterno. Gli SCIF possono essere permanenti o temporanei, quando i legislatori o gli ufficiali militari devono essere informati mentre sono in viaggio. Il più famoso SCIF è probabilmente la Situation Room della Casa Bianca, dove i presidenti hanno deliberato le più importanti decisioni di politica estera e militare del paese.
What level of security clearance is required to fully access these programs?
Well, anybody who has...
and I say that because myself, Representative Gates and Representative Luna were basically turned away at one point at Eglin. So please go right ahead.
Certainly difference between member access and, say, somebody like me, but anybody who has a TSSCI clearance and meets the eligibility criteria, the access adjudicative authority should be able to grant you access.
Mr. Burchett, if you'll yield, so just to put a fine point on that, there's nothing that you're aware of that's above special access program classification.
It's a misnomer that there's anything actually above top secret. Executive Order 13526 delineates the classification levels.
Right, but I draw a point on that because we can have access to those programs, and so the notion that we're not being given that access sort of defies our typical muscle memory here in Congress. Thank you, Mr. Burchett. I'll yield back to you.
Abbiamo imparato che non esiste nessuna classificazione denominata above top secret, cioè più alto del top secret. Le classificazioni sono due: TSSCI, Top Secret or Sensitive Compartment Information. Quindi, su questo argomento sembra che i cospirazionisti abbiano torto, uno dei pochi tra l'altro.
And so I want to get down to, if we can, some specifics, right? So at one point you had said that there has been harmful activity or aggressive activity. Has any of the activity been aggressive, been hostile in your reports?
I know of multiple colleagues of mine that got physically injured. And the activity... And I gotta,
by UAPs or by people within the federal government?
Both.
Okay, yeah. So there has been activity by alien or non-human technology and or beings that has caused harm to humans.
I can't get into the specifics in an open environment, but at least the activity that I personally witnessed. And I have to be very careful here because they tell you never to acknowledge tradecraft, right? So what I personally witnessed, myself and my wife, was very disturbing.
Abbiamo scoperto che lui e sua moglie, che evidentemente lavorano insieme, hanno assistito a qualcosa di very disturbing, che si traduce con molto inquietante, o molto sconvolgente, o molto preoccupante. Teniamo a mente questa descrizione, riteniamo che sia importante, presto ci torneremo su.
Okay. One of my constituents actually sent this next question, and I figured I'd ask it since I had the same thought. You've said that the U.S. has intact spacecraft. You said that the government has alien bodies or alien species. Have you seen the spacecraft?
I have to be careful to describe what I've seen firsthand and not in this environment, but I could answer that question behind closed doors. Yeah.
And have you seen any of the bodies?
That's something I've not witnessed myself.
My view has been that we are billions of light years away from any other system. And the concept that an alien species that's technologically advanced enough to travel billions of light years gets here and somehow is incompetent enough to not survive Earth or crashes is something that I find a little bit far-fetched. And with that being said, you have mentioned that there's interdimensional potential. Could you expound on that?
Yeah, to answer your first question, and I'm here as a fact witness and expert, but I will give you a theoretical framework, at least to work off, to kind of espouse crashes, regardless of your level of sentience, right? Planes crash, cars crash, n number of sorties, however high, a small percentage are going to end in mission failure, if you will, as we say in the Air Force.
Come mai si schiantano gli UFO se sono tecnologicamente avanzati? Perché indipendentemente dal livello tecnologico c'è sempre una minima parte di incidenti che accadono. E questa la possiamo mettere nelle FAQ.
And then in terms of multidimensionality, that kind of thing, the framework that I'm familiar with, for example, is something called the holographic principle. It derives itself from general relativity and quantum mechanics, and that is, if you want to imagine a 3D object such as yourself casting a shadow onto a 2D surface, that's the holographic principle. So you can be projected, quasi-projected from higher dimensional space to lower dimensional. It's a scientific trope that you can actually cross, literally, as far as I understand, but there's probably guys with PhDs that we could probably argue about that.
But you have not seen any documentation that that's what's occurring?
Only a theoretical framework discussion. Yes.
Okay.
Quale scienza c'è dietro il fenomeno UFO? Il principio olografico, cioè proiettare una dimensione più elevata su una dimensione inferiore, il Tesseract, come ci ha spiegato Carl Sagan, in un video che abbiamo pubblicato qualche mese fa.
Several months ago, my office received a protected disclosure from Eglin Air Force Base indicating that there was a UAP incident that required my attention. I sought a briefing regarding that episode and brought with me Congressman Burchett and Congresswoman Luna. We asked to see any of the evidence that had been taken by flight crew in this endeavor and to observe any radar signature as well as to meet with the flight crew. We were not afforded access to all of the flight crew. And initially, we were not afforded access to images and to radar. Thereafter, we had a bit of a discussion about how authorities flow in the United States of America, and we did see the image. And we did meet with one member of the flight crew who took the image. The image was of something that I am not able to attach to any human capability, either from the United States or from any of our adversaries. And I'm somewhat informed on the matter, having served on the Armed Services Committee for 7 years, having served on the committee that oversees DARPA and advanced technologies for several years.
Abbiamo imparato che l'onorevole Gaetz, che tra l'altro sovrintende la DARPA, non solo ha avuto grandi difficoltà a vedere le prove, ma ciò che ha visto non era creato dall'uomo e che ha dovuto spiegare al generale come funziona la catena di comando.
When we spoke with the flight crew, and when he showed us the photo that he'd taken, I asked why the video wasn't engaged, why we didn't have a FLIR system that worked. Here's what he said. They were out on a test mission that day over the Gulf of Mexico, and when you're on a test mission, you're supposed to have clear airspace, not supposed to be anything that shows up. And they saw a sequence of 4 craft in a clear diamond formation for which there is a radar sequence that I alone have observed in the United States Congress. One of the pilots goes to check out that diamond formation and sees a large floating, what I can only describe as an orb, again, like I said, not of any human capability that I'm aware of. And when he approached, he said that his radar went down, he said that his FLIR system malfunctioned, and that he had to manually take this image from one of the lenses, and it was not automated in collection as you would typically see in a test mission. So I guess I'll start with Commander Fravor. How should we think about the fact that this craft that was approached by our pilot had the capability of disarming a number of the sensor and collection systems on that craft?
Well, I think this goes to that national security side, and you can go back through history of things showing up at certain areas and disabling our capabilities, which is disheartening. And for us, I mean, like I said, it completely disabled the radar on the aircraft when it tried to do it, and the only way we could see it is passively, which is how you got that image. So I think that's a concern on what are these doing, not only how do they operate, but their capabilities inside to do things like this.
L'UFO in questione ha disarmato la capacità di raccolta automatizzate dell'aereo. In pratica le telecamere riprendono continuamente e l'unico modo per fotografarlo è stato manualmente. Inoltre Fravor ci conferma che gli UFO nella storia hanno spesso disabilitato e a volte abilitato le capacità militari all'interno di alcune basi. Ad esempio, i meccanismi di lancio degli ICBM, un po' in giro per il mondo, come abbiamo riportato nello splendido episodio numero 12 con John Ramirez.
And then do you believe there's an active disinformation campaign within our government to deny existence of UAPs, yes or no?
I don't have an answer to that.
As previously stated publicly, yes.
I think previously with like Project Blue Book, yes, but currently I don't speak for the United States government.
Okay, thank you.
Un po' di fact-checking. Qua dobbiamo dare credito ai cospirazionisti, che sono anni che dicono che c'è una campagna di disinformazione, almeno dal 1947, da Roswell. Oggi ne abbiamo la conferma.
I have a few questions for Mr. Graves. What percentage of UAP sightings, in your belief, go unreported by our pilots?
This is an approximation based off of my personal experience speaking with a number of pilots, but I would estimate we're somewhere near 5% reporting, perhaps.
So like 95% basically don't report seeing UAPs.
That's just my personal estimate.
It was stated explicitly to me by these test pilots that if you have a UAP experience, the best thing you can do for your career is forget it and not tell anyone. Because any type of reporting, either above the surface or below the surface, does have a perceived consequence to these people, and that is a culture we must change if we want to get to the truth.
Ecco i danni della disinformazione, sia da parte del governo che da parte degli scettici professionisti.
Do you believe that officials at the highest levels of our national security apparatus have unlawfully withheld information from Congress and subverted our oversight authority?
There are certain elected leaders that had more information that I'm not sure what they've shared with certain Gang of Eight members or et cetera, but certainly I would not be surprised.
Okay. You've stated that the government is in possession of potentially non-human spacecraft. Based on your experience and extensive conversations with experts, do you believe our government has made contact with intelligent extraterrestrials?
Something I can't discuss in public setting.
Nell'episodio numero 2, Tom DeLonge ci aveva spiegato che nel dopoguerra i militari avevano trovato una forma di vita aliena. Nell'episodio numero 16, 4 testimonianze ci hanno raccontato che a febbraio del 1955 Eisenhower aveva incontrato le intelligenze non umane, o NHI, Non Human Intelligence. Oggi Grush ci dice che non può parlare in pubblico. Con ragionevole certezza possiamo anche concludere che gli americani hanno incontrato gli alieni e noi aggiungiamo che sono ancora in contatto.
If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Abbiamo anche conferma che sono in possesso dei corpi dei piloti degli UFO.
I serve on the National Security Subcommittee for the Financial Services Committee, so I really want to stay in the national security lane, if I may. So when we think about traditional adversaries and both us towards them and them towards us, you know, we probe their capabilities. We look for weaknesses, and we collect that data, that reconnaissance for in the event we need it in the future. For each of you, yes or no question. Based off of your own experience or the data that you've been privy to, is there any indication that these UAPs could be essentially collecting reconnaissance information? Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Mr. Grush?
Fair assessment, yeah.
Mr. Fravor?
Very possible.
Again, in the national security vein, is it possible that these UAPs would be probing our capabilities? Yes or no, Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Grush?
Yes.
Fravor?
Definitely.
Is it possible that these UAPs are testing for vulnerabilities in our current systems?
Yes.
Yes, possible.
Do you feel, based off of your experience and the information that you've been privy to, that these UAPs provide an existential threat to the national security of the United States? Mr. Graves?
Potentially.
Yes, sir, potentially.
Same answer, potentially.
Yeah, I'd say definitely, potentially.
Mr. Graves and Fravor, in the event that your encounters had become hostile, would you have had the capability to defend yourself, your crew, your aircraft?
Absolutely not.
Sir?
No.
Is based off of the information that you've been privy to, is there any indication that these UAPs are interested in our nuclear technology and capabilities?
Yes.
By external observation, sure, that could be a fair assessment, yeah.
Yes.
Is there any indication that the Department of Energy is involved in UAP data collection and housing?
I don't have an answer.
I can't confirm or deny that in a public setting.
And could you do it in a secure setting?
Yes.
Mr. Fravor?
No, I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, I think I'm the last member to go, but there clearly is a threat to the national security of the United States of America. As members of Congress, we have a responsibility to maintain oversight and be aware of these activities so that, if appropriate, we take action. I would encourage the chairman to demand that we have any and all, but in particular Mr. Grush, talk to us in a skiff. And if that access is denied, I will personally volunteer to initiate the Holman Rule against any personnel or any program or any agency that denies access to Congress.
Un grande l'onorevole Ogles. Che cos'è la Holman Rule? La regola di Holman è una regola della Camera dei rappresentanti degli Stati Uniti che consente di presentare emendamenti alla legislazione sugli stanziamenti per ridurre lo stipendio o licenziare determinati dipendenti federali o tagliare un programma specifico. Quindi anche in questo caso gli scettici professionisti hanno torto quando dicono, senza ovviamente portare prove, che la disclosure è fatta per cercare nuovi fondi, come se la guerra Russia-Ucraina non fosse la migliore scusa per portare nuovi fondi. Secondo loro il Pentagono con una guerra in corso si inventa tutto ciò, compreso l'impegno legislativo, per cercare nuovi fondi. Sapete quant'è il budget del 2023 del Pentagono? 782 miliardi di dollari.
I'd like to submit for the record an article by News Nation, and it follows Mr. Grush's full interview for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Hanno messo a verbale tutta l'intervista di News Nation che abbiamo pubblicato a luglio. Quindi siamo ragionevolmente sicuri che tutto ciò che ha detto era vero.
Mr. Grush, why is it that you refer to the phenomenon as non-human intelligence? Why deviate from the basis of extraterrestrial life?
I think the phenomenon is very complex, and I like to leave an open mind analytically to specific origin.
When you say specific origin, are you referring, can you elaborate on that for those that might not?
If it's a traditional extraterrestrial origin or something else that we don't quite understand from either a biological or astrophysics perspective, yeah, I just like to keep an open mind on what it could be, yeah.
Okay, and referring to your News Nation in an interview, you had referenced specific treaties between governments. Article 3 of the Nuclear Arms Treaty with Russia identifies UAPs. It specifically mentions them. To your knowledge, are there safety measures in place with foreign governments or other superpowers to avoid an escalatory situation in the event that a UAP malevolent event occurs?
Yeah, you're referring to actual public treaty in the UN Register. It's funny you mentioned that. Yeah, the Agreement on Measures to Reduce the Risk of Outbreak of Nuclear War signed in 1971. Unclassified treaty publicly available. And if you cite the George Washington University National Security Archives, you will find the declassified in 2013 specific provisions in the specific red line flash message traffic with the specific codes pursuant to Article 3 and Article, also Situation 2, which is in the the previously classified NSA archive. What I would recommend, and I tried to get access, but I got a wall of silence at the White House, was those specific incidents when those message traffic was used. I think some scholarship on that would open the door to a further investigation using those publicly available information.
Thank you.
Cosa ci stanno dicendo? In breve, America e Russia hanno fatto un accordo durante la Guerra Fredda, con clausole specifiche riguardo agli UFO. Siccome entrambe le nazioni avevano le stesse esperienze riguardo agli avvistamenti radar di UFO, disarmo e armamento dei missili ICBM, come abbiamo capito dall'episodio 12, hanno siglato un trattato per realizzare un metodo di comunicazione in tempo reale, una linea rossa, per parlarsi ufficialmente e rapidamente, per rassicurarsi a vicenda che quello che vedevano sui radar non erano i missili di una o dell'altra parte, ovviamente per scongiurare una guerra nucleare che distruggerebbe il pianeta. Questo accordo è all'ONU.
And then my last question with 51 seconds remaining. You mentioned white-collar crimes potentially being taking place in regards to a cover-up. Can you please elaborate?
I have concerns based on the interviews I conducted under my official duties of potential violations of the Federal Acquisition Regulations, the FAR.
Anche qua ulteriori conferme di insabbiamenti da parte dei colletti bianchi.
I think we're going to want to look into what we can do to make more of this information public. I think there's certainly a time period after which it should always be made public, and people have been concerned about these issues, like I said, since I was in high school.
Ma quando arriverà la disclosure in Italia?
We talked about Russia over the weekend in George Knapp's letter saying that Russia has this UFO program. We've talked about Italy having a program. Do you think there's going to be more information coming out of these other places besides America? What are you hearing from your sources in other countries?
Oh boy, that's a very good question, Brian. I don't know if it's going to be in the short term, but I do know that countries like France and the UK, and there's also a possibility that I think eventually Russia might be more forthcoming about what it knows. During the course of the research of my book, I spoke to people in Russia, people from the former Soviet military who'd witnessed incidents during the Cold War. And there was probably the largest ever UFO UAP study that's ever been done was done by the Soviets during the Cold War. It was a 10-year study, and it uncovered a formidable number of unexplained incidents. And there's no doubt at all that there are archives, because some of them were declassified from Russia, and my colleague George Knapp brought some of them back to America and provided them to investigators here in America. But the simple fact is that I think it's going to take a long while for those to come out. I think most of the other countries in the world that have this information, and I've spoken to people who told me that they do have it, are waiting for the lead from America.
Yeah,
I think
that makes sense.
What's going to drive this is for the next few months, I think, is the White House.